We have come to class 9 of History 373. We're going to talk about the time between Hong Kong's turnover to China and really the start of the 1980s. So there's at least 17 years to cover. So it'll be quite it's not a short time, but I think the focus will be on that looming question about Hong Kong's return to China and Hong Kong response to that. That includes Hong Kong government as well as the people of Hong Kong, and that eventually happened. But in between, there's a big disaster of the Tiananmen Square killings happening, really affecting both China and Hong Kong. So we're going to pay attention to that today. So it'd be quite a bit of uh, things to cover, but hopefully we can do so. Now, let me take you back to the end of 1970s, when you remember what we talked about. It was a time of a increasingly confident Hong Kong when the economy is building up, slowly switching to a financial, you can say, a city with the housing, education, all kinds of improvements. MacLehose was the governor and introducing effective government organization like the ICHC. And also there seems to be that kind of confidence of Hong Kong people especially when they compare with mainlanders, which they saw was still in troubled water for much of the 1970s because of the Cultural Revolution. But things were changing. And by the end of the 1970s, there's a concern about, especially within MacLehose's government, that what happened when the day 1997 came. Now, you remember the day 1997 was actually the time of the deadline for the lease of new territories. So both Hong Kong and Kowloon, if you remember our early classes, were ceded to the British Empire, but not new territories. New territories were leased to the Hong Kong government, and the area was due to be returned to China in 1997. But I think at the time of the lease, 100 years was a long time. And so people really did not have much thoughts about it. And also Hong Kong and Kowloon was actually not part of it. But since China never really accepted this so-called unequal treaties, so it was really just you can say a deadline for the whole area that it seems to be still around. Of course, by 1970s, China's position in the world is much different than when Hong Kong and Kowloon were seated back in the 19th century. So much has changed, and there's a real concern. And also, a lot has changed with the British Empire as well. You can argue that no longer it feels that it can really hold on to Hong Kong without China saying yes. Okay, so there's a uncertainty. Will China want to take Hong Kong back? Because there was evidence that China was not too interested in taking Hong Kong back. Even if they just look at Macau, who at the 123 riot, the December 3rd riot, the Portuguese government was quite ready to give up Macau, but actually, it was the Chinese government that saying, no, we don't want Macau yet. We rather just improve our communication, have someone there to, express our wills, and make sure that you do things, with always with our consensus. So that's the kind of path they taken. And if you remember, I used to mention to you the Chinese had this long time strategy for Hong Kong and Macau. So they're trying to keep them in foreign hands as long as possible so that they can make the most benefits from it, especially during a time when China, for example, was in hot water with the world. China and Macau would offer a place for them to exchange ideas, have some things going on. For example, if China is not supposed to have a relationship with the States, but if officials met in Hong Kong, it would be perfectly fine, because Hong Kong is a free port. So it was always kind of that beneficial. Also, during the trade embargo, Hong Kong was where the China got its resources from the world. So China always appreciate that. But that, as long as possible, doesn't mean that China did not want it back. So Matt Leo was trying to find out about when. Now, so he actually picked a good time, well, kind of from Hong Kong's point of view, because he was to return to Britain very soon at that time, in 1979. And he was also at kind of the height of his popularity because of the successes of his various social programs. So if we go there, it sounds like a very successful governor going to China, where it's just about to turn his head. Now, but perhaps if he had gone, well, it's hard to say, because if he had gone a year or so earlier, Deng Xiaoping might not be in power, full power yet. But by the time he went there, Deng Xiaoping was in full power, even though not on paper, but he was actually firmly in control. But if he went earlier, China was still, if he went before Mao's death, you'll be dealing with Mao, who's really, really just full of revolutionary ideas, and you will never know when. So Deng Xiaoping at least seem more practical and, reasonable, to have a conversation about Hong Kong future. So he went in 1979 and trying to tell China on behalf of Britain that the British were happy to support their foreign modernizations with the open door policy in China, but with the catch, kind of hoping that China would show some positive response to the issue of Hong Kong, even to the point of maybe not allowing the British to stay or have some way of I won't say joint custody, but of course it's not the right word here, but joint administration, joint jurisdiction of Hong Kong. So, but how MacLeod did was that it was not supposed to be discussed, but MacLeod suddenly brought it up. According to some official versions, he brought it up like casually, talking about, okay, if Hong Kong is to develop, right now they are a business trying to build things in new territories. But if the date of 1997 was not resolved or was still a question, it will hurt some of the business person. For example, if they came in Hong Kong in 1997, say, I'm going to build this and I want 50 years of stability before I can invest. So how can we tell them that it'll be 50 years of, stability, or that lease will be assured for 50 years if we're not even sure about 1997? So that's how MacLeod brought it up. Probably MacLeod hoped that Deng Xiaoping would, kind of have slip of his mouth and then show what China wants to play the game, or maybe even better to say that, oh, don't worry, they can just sign. We are not in a hurry to take it back, or it's just a symbolic day. We will continue the current status quo of Hong Kong. So something like that. So probably MacLeod was trying to catch Deng Xiaoping by a little surprise by bringing it up. Now Deng Xiaoping was caught by a little surprise too, but Deng Xiaoping seems like he already thought it through, or either he responded really quickly and really sharply. He said it was been consistent view that the People's Republic of China has sovereignty over Hong Kong, while Hong Kong also has its own special position. Now that MacLeod was not mistaken about. He knew that too. Then he mentioned negotiate settlement of Hong Kong question in the future should be based on the premise that the territory is part of China. However, we will treat Hong Kong as a special region. For considerable length of time, Hong Kong may continue to practice our social system. Now, when Deng Xiaoping said that, it becomes more clear that China had no intention to let Hong Kong continue to be ruled by the British. So the first part saying that China's sovereignty, Hong Kong's special position may means that the British had this administrative, so China has its territorial sovereignty, but British has administrative duties. For example, sometimes international relationship work like that, right? So the Macklin was probably hoping for that, but the second part is seems like that Hong Kong is going to take on the socialist system, and they will treat Hong Kong as a special region. That sounds like Hong Kong was not going to be this like now, okay? And when Matty Host returned to Hong Kong, he tried to have a more positive spin, saying that Vice President Deng Xiaoping formally requested me to ask investors in Hong Kong to put their hearts at ease. Okay, that's probably what he wanted to share, and Deng Xiaoping wanted to convey that idea too. But that idea is that they should be rest assured that even under Chinese rule, the investors should be okay. Okay, so but that's not what that McNeil wanted. McNeil wanted China to kind of commit as a chance for the British to stay, maybe to rule over Hong Kong. So subsequently, McLeod would sometimes be blamed for bringing the questions of Hong Kong to Deng Xiaoping now, which is likely is not true either, because it's hard to imagine Deng Xiaoping totally have no clue what to do with Hong Kong later. And Deng Xiaoping, since he was thinking about open door policy, thinking about developing Shenzhen, it would be impossible for him to not think about what to do with Hong Kong in the future. Okay, whether he make up his mind yet, whether he had exactly what the model he would follow yet, this is up in the air. That we're not sure. But at least it's impossible to think that he wasn't thinking about it until McLeod brought it up. So McLeod, so as a whole, his legacy of governorship has been highly praised and well remembered by the people of Hong Kong. That would be the kind of a blemish that some would talk about, as we see in the next clip. That talk about he was asked about it and he was kind of also still spinning. You can kind of see, but you can probably say that people remember him fondly, remember his reform fondly, remember what he was able to achieve fondly, especially with ICAC. Yes, too bad that the 997 did not yield a more, you can say, desirable outcome for some people. Some people want Hong Kong to be back with China's control. So I can't say it's everyone, but at least for some, especially of course, the British, didn't see a better outcome. It was for them, it was kind of one of the blemishes of his governorship. So next clip kind of summarizes is in Hong Kong, talk about McLeod's kind of legacy.
Murray MacLehose, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
Sir Murray MacLehose became Hong Kong's 25th governor and the first to come from the Foreign Office. He mapped ambitious plans for the territory. In 10 years, he wanted nearly 2 million people to have decent housing. Free education was extended from 6 to 9 years. Building recreational facilities became a priority. And on the political front, there was another milestone: Sir Murray's historic meeting with Deng Xiaoping in 1979. It's long been understood that it was Sir Murray who sprung the Hong Kong question on the Chinese leader, forcing Deng, many say, to reject anything that suggested a loss of Chinese sovereignty over the territory. He topped off his post with the establishment of the district boards in 1982, the year he retired as Hong Kong's longest-serving governor.
Well, I'm sorry to go. Bless you all.
When will we come back for a visit?
As soon as I can.
What was the first thought that came into your mind when you were offered the governorship in 1971?
I was delighted at the thought of going back to Hong Kong because I had been there as political advisor. I was a bit worried because I had not been in any colonial administration myself before. However, if they thought I could do it, I thought I'd better go on and have a shot.
What was it like trying to push through the MTR project?
The problem was that it did seem a very, very big project with a lot of money involved. And on the other hand, it seemed absolutely essential to have it. So it's the kind of dilemma that comes to one at the top of the government. There was strong backing from the Legislative Council on the Legislative Councillors and Executive Councillors on this.
You had a nickname, it was Murray in a Hurry. How did you feel about that?
Well, I did think that Hong Kong should hurry up in some ways. It would have been very bad for its international credit and for the people of Hong Kong if a lot of things were not improved within the financial limitations that obviously existed. So the thing was to get on with what we could do as quickly as we could. And there was a first-class civil service who were very able to do it and anxious to get on. So yes, I was in a hurry.
What was the exchange when you first went up to Beijing, meet Deng Xiaoping? What was that like? And did you bring up the issue of the New Territories lease unexpectedly?
I brought up, what was it like? I was very excited. He's a very great man. And to meet him was a great excitement to me. You're quite right. I brought up something which impinged on the question of the New Territories lease, which was the question of the validity of private leases in the New Territories, all of which were written to expire in 1997. But it wasn't, in fact, me who first mentioned this date, 1997. It was Deng Xiaoping. I subsequently, in that interview, raised the question of the practical implications of this date for leaseholders in the New Territories, and that sooner or later the value of land would drop unless there was some change in the leases, and this would be very bad for Hong Kong and incidentally for China, because so much capital in Hong Kong was wrapped up in property.
When you left in 1982, the district boards were introduced that year. Do you think that was a great achievement for Hong Kong?
I'm credited with having started them with a view to having an electoral system for the Legislative Council. This was not what I had in mind. I accepted that the preparation of an electoral roll for the whole of Hong Kong, which was necessary for the district board elections, which was the first time this was done, opened a possibility of elections to higher bodies, but it certainly was not in the green paper which we published, and it was not the intention. The first thing was to see if this worked.
All right, so this is a interview later on after he retired, so it was sometime later. But that was the situation. So it was the interview was still about that question about that meeting with Deng Xiaoping. Now, between 1982 and 84, since Deng Xiaoping expressed his very unmistaken view of taking Hong Kong back, the British had to deal with the actual discussing. So the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, went to Beijing to visit. Now, in 1982, she was you can say fresh from this victory at the Falklands Island, that it was a conflict between United Kingdom and Argentina, where Argentina claimed that those offshore islands of Falklands were part of Argentinian, land, and it was very popular when you do that locally. And the British, they're banking on that the British would not want to do anything about it because it's so far away. And this seems like they're not very consequential, the islands, okay? Even if the British claim it back, you're probably not going to make back the money they spend in sending a fleet, sending and fighting over these islands. But they did, mainly because the islands have inhabitants and they want to stay with the British. So as a result, the British government was caught in this kind of very difficult situation. If you give it up, you'll be very bad for politics. You'll be very bad for international, you can say, prestige, because it looks like the sun really set on the British Empire. If you couldn't even defend a few tiny islands against you can say, not very strong opponent of Argentina. But they also knew that to send a fleet over, to send arms over, to send soldiers and fighters over, is going to cost a lot of money, and it could, things could only get worse, put it this way. Even if Britain emerged victorious, is supposed to be, because it's like one of the strongest countries in the world, even though not as strong as before, they're not the strongest for sure, but still it should have some strength. If it defeat Argentina and defend the islands, is supposed to be happening like that, right? But even that, they didn't get any extra praise for it, but most likely it's going to give them a lot of expenses, okay, because of sending armies over. But for Argentina, it's got everything to win, okay? Even if it get defeated, it's not like it's because it's picking a fight with the big guy, right? But if the British back off, they would have very good consequences for the country because of the rising nationalism. But long story short, British went, and after a costly campaign, they maintained control. So the effect was more hidden, you can say, and because it's more about lives lost, and also the budget, okay, because they're spending money to defend these islands, okay. But for Margaret Thatcher herself, it did cement her position as a strong hand politician and very strong-willed leader. So she was hoping that with that victory, when she went to China, she would be able to get some consensus or some kind of preferable, response from Chinese, including a suggestion, as I mentioned, China maintained the sovereignty. British is not going to fight against that because there's no point of fighting. It's just that how about British maintain the administrative rule over Hong Kong, while saying that China, Hong Kong is part of China. Deng Xiaoping basically offered no concessions. So Margaret Thatcher went with no use, there's nothing. British is not going to fight over against China for Hong Kong, militarily, that's out of the question. And when she stumbled in front of the steps of the Great Hall of the People, it was very appears a bad omen in the eyes of the Hong Kong people. So this is. So to the eyes of, say the West, this is just a fall. Okay, it's nothing hurtful, nothing bad. Some people may feel that this is kind of not a very good sign, but definitely among the Chinese and the Chinese in Hong Kong, it was a really bad sign. It seems like the Great Britain is crumbling in front of the, emerging Chinese kingdom. Okay, so this is everything signs that I remember back in Hong Kong, people was reading this news, and then a sentiment of pessimism really spread through. Okay, oh, we're doomed. Okay, British, it's being humble. Okay, Hong Kong is going to be returned, and we'll be in trouble. So a lot of things being said now. In practice, this is exactly what happens to in the way to understand is that China is affirming that it's going to take back Hong Kong. But this is still early days, okay? And no one kind of knew how to do it. So Deng Xiaoping was very smart in that he's just going to issue a few very general statements to assure the Hong Kongers that things will be okay. He didn't have the details yet. What he said is that he's just assured that two things you should that been repeated a lot. He said that Hong Kong would be a special administrative region. So, and they will follow the principle one country, two systems, meaning that yes, it was still one country, but just like now, Hong Kong, is under British rule, is one system. China is another. Hong Kong in the future will also be under another system, even though it belongs to China. So it was that trying to assure people that Hong Kong will not become like another communist country like China, which is what the Hong Kong people really are afraid of since 1967, since the riots there. The 67, the leftists, the revolutionaries, the communists all wanted Hong Kong to be just like China. Just as crazy as the revolutionaries, the Red Guards. And Hong Kong said no. And since then, Hong Kong has been saying no. Hong Kong enjoy what is having. So Deng Xiaoping knew that. So he would use words like Hong Kong will enjoy a high degree of autonomy, be executive, legislative, and independent judicial power. So very important, especially the independent judicial power, which someone will claim that nowadays Hong Kong has lost a lot of it, if not everything, if not all of it. So there's a concern about Hong Kong losing their freedom or their autonomy happening since 2019, you can say. But at that time, it was that assurance that he was trying to give to the Hong Kong government. And there's also a saying that Hong Kong will remain unchanged for 50 years. So that will be a lot of some of the assurance. You say that government and legislature will be composed of local inhabitants, and the chief executive, this is important, will be appointed by the central government on the basis of its results of elections or consultations to be held locally. So this is very carefully worded. It's not that they will be elected by the results of the elections. The chief executive will be appointed by the central government after considering the results of elections, which will be all consultations. So they don't even want to agree with elections, maybe just consultations, but will be held locally. So, but that is the long-time China you can say strategy towards you can say self-rule. So in China, a lot of the autonomous regions like Xinjiang and Tibet, they do the same thing. They call it autonomous region. The meaning of autonomous is that the local people will rule. So it's not someone I send over from Beijing or Shanghai, okay? So you'll be local ruling. So that's how they define autonomous. But that local ruling is almost always by local communists. So someone, for example, yes, from Tibet, but it's a Tibet communist, or a Xinjiang, or but is a Uyghur member of the Communist Party. So that's always the way China is. On one hand, saying that they have autonomous. On the other, you show that autonomous is very limited. And that if that autonomous kind of override the general interests of the country or the party, that autonomous can easily be compromised, put it this way. So the wording suggests a similar thing, even though what is new is one country, two systems, and the assurance that Hong Kong will remain 50 years unchanged. So that's just some of the wording that Deng Xiaoping said to try to assure that the public that Hong Kong would be okay. and they signed this joint declaration in 1984, all smiling. But people know that this is basically the beginning of a struggle. The British will, because they have to be responsible to not only their voters but also the world, will try the best in the next 13 years to try to create more room for freedom in Hong Kong, while China is trying to limit damages because they are on the kind of wrong side. People have been questioning about China. China just emerged from a very devastating cultural revolution. So who knows, what another leader will bring. Deng Xiaoping is in charge now. He seems like he's very level-headed, very practical, yeah. But who knows, when is another leftist will become the country's president or chairman of the CCP, and maybe another form of cultural revolution may happen. So no one knows. So China really feels like he has something to prove, while British will try to, I won't say sabotage is the word that the mainland Chinese would use sometimes during those days, but it's trying to show that, yes, there's nothing we can do, China's going to take back Hong Kong, we can leave now, or we can leave at 1997 after all these proper procedures, okay? Since we're only going to leave in 1997, might as well do as much as we can to show that we care, to show that we help Hong Kong to have more democracy. Now, I say that because not without merit, because later China would blame British for trying to push democracy quickly in that final 13 years. And you can't really blame them for that, because British really did not push for any really reasonable form of representation anytime before that. MacLeod's talked about it. He was basically just introducing tiny bit of it. The actual formation of it is actually 1 year after the signing of the joint declaration. And the joint declaration is signed just to say that both countries agree that that's how Hong Kong is going to develop, okay? Hong Kong is going to return. They're going to set up this basic law committee to figure out what the basic law of the constitution would be, but it will be based upon a very general principles of one country, two systems, and change within the years. That's really the content of the joint declaration. So they are still going to figure out the actual contents, okay? The detailed contents of the basic law. But a year after that signing, they start this, you can say, electoral reform. So you can't really blame China for saying, well, why didn't you do earlier, right? Because if you remember some of the earlier lectures, the British tried doing that when they claimed Hong Kong back in 1945, with the Young Plan. If you remember, the governor Young tried to bring the Young Plan to bring more Chinese into a representation government, but then it was not very popular, and a lot of the non-Chinese officials, residents opposed this idea. So the Young Plan was abolished really quickly. So, but nothing about it, or nothing much about happened afterwards. There may be more, regional representation, meaning the in the form of city councils to kind of listen to people, but usually it's regarding more civil matters. For example, okay, there should be a park over here. The road is always clustered. Can we build more roads? Crime is, increasing. Can we do something about it? So that kind of a regional consultation and development. Okay, should there be a library there? It's something like that. So nothing like major, or definitely nothing legislation about. So what the British were trying to do since 1984 and 5 is that they're trying to bring in more people that will back the legislature side, the way of making rules and coming up with new regulations. And that's exactly what China didn't want, okay? China didn't want is one-party system in China. China never wanted to share. The Communist Chinese never want to share power, and they were not going to begin with Hong Kong. But so that's the kind of the, you can say the spark of the tag of war or struggle between British or the Hong Kong colonial government and the Chinese government, and eventually became a major clash when it came to the time of Chris Patten. Now, before I come to Chris Patten, let's look at some of the governors in Hong Kong. And if you remember a part in the video, the clip you watched earlier, mentioned that Macleod was the first to come from the Foreign Office. Because before that, all the governors came from the colonial from a colonial background. Now, this is more history than we need to go into. But basically, in Britain, there are different departments for, you can say, foreign affairs. Okay, the Foreign Office is in charge of all the affairs between the British government and the world. But there are also colonial government or colonial office that take care of colonial matters. So usually, now if we allow me to just very generally tell you the difference between the two, the colonial governments usually more concerned about making sure the colony is firmly in the hands of the British and is contributing to, so the colony is contributing to the government, to the British Empire or to the British country of Britain. But the Foreign Office is usually more, how to say, long-viewed, with a longer perspective. So this perspective is wider and longer. So it's more like about how to bring benefits to the kingdom, to the country, through foreign policies or foreign relationship. So to give you an example that it'd be easier to look at. When during the riots in 1967, the colonial officials, especially those under David Tran himself, as I mentioned to you, he was himself losing faith and he went back home for a long vacation during the hardest time of the riots. But those under him, Michael Gass, Jack Cater, they were more colonial thinking. Colonial thinking would be how can we preserve colonial rule, okay? How can we do the most to strengthen the colonial government, colonial rule over Hong Kong and, and maintain control. So they're more for hitting the leftists, confiscating their, materials, wealth, arresting the troublemakers, and even closing down some of the leftist newspapers as they did. That led to the ultimatum and burning of the British embassy. While the British diplomats, they were, or the Foreign Office, they were different. For them, if you hit the leftists too hard in Hong Kong, that means that you're going to anger China. Then in the long term, it's not going to be good. Yes, you may maintain the rule of Hong Kong, but Hong Kong maybe eventually will be returned to China. So if we really mess up our relationship with China, there's going to be bad consequences everywhere else. So maybe we should take a more moderate approach. Okay, we should just wait and see how the leftists respond in Hong Kong, okay, and not take too drastic measurements. So that's the major difference between the Foreign Office and the Colonial Office. So later on, I think the government realized that this is not going too well, so they combined the two, trying to align the two groups' interests together. But that will be later. But by, in the 60s, it's still a very strong, tradition, okay? David Tran is from a colonial background. So MacLeod, starting from MacLeod, they actually start sending more diplomats, or you can say ambassador, from the Foreign Office tradition. So they came with a broader view, how to use Hong Kong to benefit the future British position. So MacLeod was one of them. That's why MacLeod is not really MacLeod's wanting to do reforms is also reflecting the colonial priority of ruling Hong Kong better. But MacLeod was also trying to, look at the international relationship and trying to talk to China. So it'll be that kind of a role that he's also playing. Now, the next two, you can even call them sinologists. which will means they are in Chinese Tong. That means they knew China well. Usually they were some ambassadors to China earlier or some officials in working with the Chinese. So people like Edward Yu would know Chinese well, would speak Mandarin well. He could handle Chinese really well. So the next two are usually kind of well liked or well trusted. Let's not use the word well, okay, but at least somewhat liked and trusted by the Chinese officials. So the British government decided to send less a fighter, okay, more a collaborators, or not less collaborator, less a diplomats, okay, that would work with China rather than clash with China. So that will be a decision. So first they said Edward Yu. Now Edward Yu's time in Hong Kong was quite short. Now Chris Patten will be different as we talk. Chris Patten will be a politician, and we'll talk about how the big difference that would be because he came from a political background. So meaning that this will be diplomats, they will be civil servants, but Chris Patten would be a politician. It's totally different system. These were appointed, they would be permanent secretaries, stay in the department for a long time, say foreign department. Chris Patten would be a politician, voted by the voters. So very different system. Now, Yun himself was a ambassador to China from 74 to 78. So he liked he knew and he liked Chinese culture. He well liked by Chinese himself. He knew the country well. So they were hoping that by sending someone that kind of well liked, he will be able to bring some positive outcome for the British Empire. Now, his governorship would be cut short because he died on the job. But he was also another well-liked governor because of his demeanor. He is quite soft-spoken. Is always have a smile on his face, and it was a time when Hong Kong was under a lot of pressure because a lot of people left Hong Kong in fear of 1997, and you being there helped bring some kind of stability to Hong Kong. And Yu was also very into continue to not only improve relationship between Hong Kong and China, but also improve the communities and economy and community buildings in Hong Kong. It was during his governorship that Hong Kong saw its dollar peak to US dollars in 1983. It was during a financial crisis that if Hong Kong did not pick its dollar to the US, it may the value of Hong Kong dollars may lose to the point that they will lose a lot of investments, and you will deem Hong Kong dollars quite useless at that point. So they make the decision to pick Hong Kong dollars to US dollars. That was actually a very good decision because also a sensible decision because Hong Kong was no longer a major manufacturer. The reason why you want Hong Kong to be a cheaper currency is when you have a lot of exports. That means it's cheaper for people to buy, and that means your exports will do really well when your currency is low. But when in early 1980s, Hong Kong was already a financial center, then it's more important for Hong Kong dollars to have some value. So when you pick the US dollars, meaning that that doesn't matter how poor Hong Kong's economy is doing, when you have Hong Kong dollars, when you buy back US dollars, you can always get back, for example, each $10 you get 7.82, something like that. So you always get some value. That means that the Hong Kong value is was maintained, and that gives assurances to investors for people holding onto Hong Kong dollars. So that avoid the Hong Kong economy to collapse at that point. Now, Yu was also has a legacy of non-extravagance. He also had a image of hard workers. He will be, frequently visiting China to talk to officials, trying to get a good kind of working relationship between the two governments. His sudden death during work left a legacy of dedication and non-extravagance, because they only fined 1.25 million at the time of his death, even though by that time he could have received more than $4 million. He gave money away. He definitely did not try to collect a great wealth during his governorship in Hong Kong. One story about his wife, Madam Yu or Lady Yu, was that she was traveling on a Cathay Pacific flight, which is a Hong Kong flight company or airline company, that she was spotted by the staff, at the airport, by the airline, and they moved her to first class because they said, well, this is a wife of a governor. She should not be sitting in the, I don't know, I can't remember she was sitting with a economy or just a business class. But anyway, they upgraded her seats. And when they insist, she said yes and thank you and smilingly accepted. But when she got home, she sent back the money of the difference of the seat and just thanked the airline company for being kind and understanding to help give her a more comfortable seat, but she cannot just take it as a gift. So it was stories like that that shows that these two couple really knew how to, did not take advantage of the position and really work hard. And if you go to Hong Kong, there's still a number of memorial set up for Sir Edward Yu, including some of the places, some of the museums, and also a scholarship which his wife would still return to Hong Kong after his death many years to speak, and the awards will be the Sir Edward Yu Memorial Scholarships to help Hong Kong students to go overseas to study. So they offer money for the Hong Kong students to go overseas and get an education. So well-liked, well-loved, but his governorship was cut really short. Now, this is a short video about his death at the time.
Good evening. As you may have heard, the Governor, Sir Edward Yu, is dead. He passed away in his sleep last night at the British ambassador's residence in Beijing. Sir Edward was to have returned to Hong Kong earlier today from a trade promotion mission in the Chinese capital. Mimi Yeung reports.
Early this morning, Sir Edward's private secretary, Richard Hall, tried to wake the governor up for the airport. But having received no response, he informed the British ambassador, Sir Richard Evans, at 6:20, saying something was very wrong. Sir Richard then called an Australian doctor to the governor's room, but Sir Edward was already dead by the time the doctor arrived. Decisions as to when the body will be sent back to Hong Kong and other funeral arrangements will have to be made by Lady Yu later. Sir Edward came to Beijing on December the 1st as guest of honor of an economic and trade delegation of the Trade Development Council. He had opened TDC's Beijing office and the Hong Kong product exhibition. Yesterday, he had talks with Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Zhou Nan and Deputy Director of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, Li Ho. Sir Edward made his last public appearance in Del Yutai State Guest House yesterday, attending a dinner reception hosted by the Director of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, Ji Pengfei. For Newsfile, Mimi Yeung, TVB News, Beijing.
Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher expressed her personal regret tonight over the untimely death of Sir Edward. In a message sent from 10 Downing Street, Mrs. Thatcher said she was deeply distressed to hear of Sir Edward's unexpected death. She describes Sir Edward as an outstanding civil servant who served Hong Kong to the end. The governor's death was disclosed by now acting Governor Sir David Akers-Jones. Members of the Executive Council immediately pledged their support to Sir David. They also paid tribute to Sir Edward. Betty Liu has the story.
The acting governor informed executive councillors of Sir Edward's death at a special meeting early this morning.
They expressed their deepest regret and pledged their full support to the acting governor. They paid tribute to Sir Edward's untiring and unstinting service to the people of Hong Kong, and expressed their heartfelt sympathy to Lady Youd and her family.
As a mark of respect, EXCO decided that all ceremonial and public engagements will be cancelled this weekend. After an OMELCO meeting in the afternoon, senior EXCO member Sir S.Y. Chung said members were profoundly saddened by news of the sudden death.
Through his personal efforts, a solid foundation has now been laid for Hong Kong to go forward
to be a bit shorter
towards.
Maybe this version of mine is a bit longer. Now, as mentioned, during this time, since basically it's very soon after the declaration of the joint declaration, you can see the number of migrants leaving Hong Kong. Now, this is Canadian figures, skyrocketed or really went up. Now, this is compared to migrants from mainland China. This is the Hong Kong numbers coming out, especially in the mid 1980s and go all the way up, reaching a height a couple years before 1997. It's only started coming down when the day was closing in, and maybe this time is that those who were managed to leave already left. But then the trend keeps going down, showing that after 1997, a lot of people felt more assured. They didn't see big changes. They didn't see law purging. They didn't see communists nationalizing properties and confiscating business. So they didn't see what they were most afraid of. For example, happened in Shanghai in early 1950s, or in China in early 1950s. So some confidence came back, and so number went down, but also explained by the most of those who were able to leave already left for Canada at that time. And so later in the 2000s, the mainland migrants will replace the Hong Kongers as the biggest group of, you can say, Chinese migrants to Canada. But that will be the situation. A lot of uncertainty there. And of course, as part of the uncertainty, if you see this part, it's not just that those who are able to go, but also because of Tiananmen Square, which we'll come to. But after Edward Yu, the next, you can say, Sino just came. His name is David Wilson. David Wilson also knew China well. He was a long time Foreign Office diplomat, someone to be also kind of trusted by China, and perhaps maybe even too trusted by China. Some of his opponents would say that he's too soft to negotiate with China. A lot of the negotiations he had with China always come being pushed away or being rejected by the Chinese, as we see some of them. His name is interesting. He used to be called Wei Dawei, which in Mandarin sounds okay. But when the Hong Kong Chinese, this is another superstitious, rendering, when they saw his name, they said, what the, because his name has these two words or two characters that form the word Wei, Nai. Now, right here, you can see two of them. Each one of this, if you look at the Chinese characters, it's kind of made by different parts. But the part they make, you can kind of disintegrate it to recite 1008 female ghosts, okay? So when you say, for example, together, this letter character of Nai, okay? In Cantonese, some people say that means 千百女鬼, okay? 1,800 female ghosts, okay? So when you have two of these characters here, one with the mountains above, that means that there's 3,600 female ghosts, okay? So too many female ghosts to feel comfortable about his name. So his name was changed to Wei Sun. He had the unthankful and difficult task of pushing this, you can say, electoral reform in Hong Kong that has been put aside since the Young Plan in 1945. So 40-something years, ago, they try, and they never really try. When Matthew was mentioned that he started this progress, as mentioned, it's about local councils, about some regional councils. So it's not something that regarding legislation, at least the future of the city. So what happened is what they need is that they need to increase the numbers in the legislative council that will be directly or indirectly elected, and hopefully they can do now. The ideal for the British was to have enough number that by 1997 that would either control the legislative council or at least majorly influence. So the ideal idea is that, for example, if there's about 60 seats of the legislative council, by 1997 there will be more than 30 of them will be directly elected by the Hong Kong people. That means that Hong Kong people will be able to make decisions for themselves, right? And of course, that would be something that China would not want. Yes, it's just one country, two system, but not like that kind of a totally different system, because if China, because under Deng Xiaoping, China is already opening up really quickly. But Deng Xiaoping's one thing Deng Xiaoping didn't want to do is to open up to democracy for people to vote down, say, the communists, okay? So that would be the red line, okay? The communists must be in power. So that's something that Deng Xiaoping would not compromise, or any Chinese communist leaders would compromise. But if Hong Kong is going to do that, it's going to be a big problem for the Chinese. And also you have to think about it, it's like within, as mentioned, within about 12, 13 years, you move from a totally non-existing representation system to a representation system that involves most, if not, half, if not more seats will be directly elected. So it's very difficult task, and David Wilson probably will never be a right person. They probably cannot find a sinologist that could do the job, because they would need to talk to China, responsible for the Chinese, sentiment. It's very difficult. So what happened is that at that time, there would be at the beginning, there will be 14 seats in the Legislative Council. What the British were suggesting in 85 is that let's increase the number. Let's make them increase the number so that they would have some members will be kind of elected now. They're not elected by the general public, but some members that hopefully that they will be elected by some. So they'll be semi-directly elected. Now this is very difficult to see right here, but I'm going to show you this will be a better representation, okay? That so what happened is that in 1984 they will be still running a system with 47 members of Legislative Council, but they will either only be made up of officials and appointed members. So officials will be government officials, okay, and the appointed members will be those appointed by the government. So basically, the government is in firm control of the Legislative Council, even by 1984. So they're suggesting by 1985 we're going to introduce some. We take out some of the members of the Legislative Council from these two categories and create two more categories. One is called the functional constituencies. The argument is that we need professionals to talk about what's to be done, what's best to be done for the future of Hong Kong. So we cannot have them not paying attention. So we should invite members of, for example, the business worlds, the labor unions, professionals like doctors and engineers, architects. They should form some constituency, okay, by some function. It's called functional constituency. For example, medical field, okay, medical functional constituency. And so with this group, maybe 200, 300, representatives of this group of people, they're going to vote for a member to become the member of legislation. So we have some representation from a certain functional group, okay? So that is not something that China felt bad about, because Chinese always felt that we have resources, we can kind of manipulate that, because in a small group, right? And they can count on, for example, if it's a business, a functional constituency, they must be friendly to China, because everyone want to continue to do business in the future in Hong Kong, and maybe even in China. Maybe some of them already own some factories in China. So China is not very concerned about this. They're more concerned about those elected by electoral college. That means that some of them will be elected by the local regional councils or city councils members. Now, city council, as mentioned, they are responsible for some regional stuff, whether we should build a park here, we should expand the library here, whether we should improve the roads over here, or have another community center built over this spot, those things. And British government have been quite good in letting them take over, because it's not making some new laws, right? And also you need local input. So basically this local city council, some of them were already elected. So they do have some election going on, but for the city councils, it's for more administrative roles. So now some of these city councils can vote for members to enter into the legislative council. That means it's kind of semi elected. So it's not totally directly elected, but it's kind of semi. But in here, I indicate as indirectly elected. So they are kind of, because if you have a lot of people who vote for the city councils, city councillors, okay, so, and they get to elect some members of the legislative, so you can still say that some local representation is being included, but still this indirect. So I will make it italicized. So out of the 57 seats, only 12 of them will have some actual election quality. But that China is not too worried either, because only 12, right? It's only a fourth. So China saying as long as you don't increase this number quickly, it will be fine. So when they have ideas, okay, that later they have having more representation in 1988, which is this year, when the British suggest that China complained that especially in 1987, that we are still drafting the basic law. We have no basic law right now. How can you decide on the plan about the legislative council? Now, the basic law has a basic law drafting committee, which is fully in China's hand, because of the 59 appointed members, 36 are from PRC and only 23 from Hong Kong. So whatever they want with the basic law, it will be agreed by the Chinese, but they didn't want to push it too hard, because they still need to maintain to make Hong Kong people trust in the new development of the return of Hong Kong. So they didn't want to scare the Hong Kong people. So even though it's firmly in control of China's hands, it's still going to move only slowly. But the committee and the Hong Kong government rejected the plan to have direct elections in 1988. So they said, okay, we're going to push back later. We're just going to slightly change the number of some of the members so that it makes more members to be indirectly elected. So when British say, let's do more changes in 88, let's have more directly elected members, China said no. 88, too soon. We're still drafting the basic law. We don't even know what we're going to do with Hong Kong in details. Okay, how can you change that legislation that quickly? So what happened is that, if you see the numbers, in 88, they only moved 2 appointed members to this group of functioning constituency. So it's not even indirectly elected. So the number indirectly elected is still only 12, and still the total number is 57. So it's basically no change from 85, which is what the Chinese government wanted. Slowly, don't rush, and let's say it happens slowly. But then something happened that changed the whole dynamics, which will be the Tiananmen Square. Now, I know Tiananmen Square is about China's history, but I have to talk about it because it's still a hot issue that I'm quite sure, part of the reasons why, China is still rejecting, search engine like Google's is because who wants to search for something like how many died in the Tiananmen Square, okay? So it's still embarrassing to China. So, but we have to talk about because it has a really big impact on Hong Kong, and on Hong Kong's, you can say, fight for electoral reform, and it changed the dynamics, and it still has an effect till today, you can say. So I have to explain what happened in China. Now, in China, it's the time of Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping is opening up China. He wants to bring in private ownership of properties. He wants to bring in more investment. So he believes that China can take on a market economy. The only thing he wasn't willing to give or to concede is to allow electoral freedom. So the only thing that China didn't want, or Deng Xiaoping didn't want, is to become a democracy. But anything other than that, people have more money, people make money, investors come in, it's fine. Deng Xiaoping was not a hardline radical leftist like Mao or his cronies, okay, the Gang of Four. Deng Xiaoping is way more pragmatic, even during the the most chaotic times of the Cultural Revolution. He was still kind of seen as a more pragmatic person. So he wants China to get rich. But they also understand you cannot just change the system overnight. You'll be total collapse, because if you suddenly change from a tightly controlled economy to a free economy, a lot of people can take advantage, and then the price will fluctuate a lot, and then a lot of people may go bankrupt, or suddenly the society may go into such a chaos. But more importantly, they also felt that they cannot pay for that. They won't be ready for that. For example, if you suddenly float the wage of workers, let the market take over, let the supply demand to take over. That means that a lot of the government employees should be paid more, because they include teachers, they include doctors, they include nurses, they include scientists, and so on. All these professionals. So China was concerned. So what China did was that let's open up the economy with the small groups first, okay? So small vendors, okay? So we can go in China. Before that, you can only buy certain things at a certain time. Even if you have money, you save enough money, doesn't mean that you can buy, say, for example, meat more than twice a week or so, because they have tickets, they have things that they have a kind of rationing system, to control how much you should consume, okay, how much you can buy. So how about if we open up that? So whoever has money can buy. That means it's a market economy. And those who have things to sell, if it's popular, they start making money. And usually those at that time is called the self-employed, the 个体户. The 个体户 is like individual entrepreneurs, more like that. So what happened is that these people start making money because these people start coming up with products that people want, whether it's a snack or a dish or some kind of items, household items. So whatever they were able to bring in or to create, they were able to sell them. But then when it came like that, for example, if they suddenly came up with a very nice snack that everyone start buying, the next step will be to increase prices, because they are running out very quickly, and they feel that they can make more money even if they raise the price up a bit, and people are still going to buy it. So, and they did. So they rise the price a bit, people still buy, they rise more, they try to make more money. So it becomes, in the 80s, that the prices start going up. Now, the problem with that, because the government could not allow the government, say, employees to enjoy the same kind of inflation with their wages, they control it. They still say you cannot be paid more than that. For example, they used to be able to buy a a carton of eggs for $10. Now it became $50, but their salary remained. So suddenly, a lot of the people came to hardship. Now, Deng Xiaoping understood that, so he kept preaching, let a small group get rich first. He said, let one group of people getting rich first, okay? And then the rest of the country will catch up. But that way proved a bit long for some people, especially these are people who were educated because they worked for the government, they were scientists, they were engineers, they were teachers, they were doctors and nurses, okay? They're all individuals. And so it seems like this picture showing, okay, those who investigate, those who does rocket science, okay, look at this guy, you know, this guy is selling eggs, okay? In Chinese, basically, they all end with the word dan. So it's kind of sounds the same, okay? So this guy getting all this education, working in the government, he's not getting any richer. But this guy just selling the tea leaves egg, but now he's wearing a suit, you know, making a lot of money. So a lot of people feel it's unfair. And the same sentiment spread to the students because they were studying to become those people they aspire, you know, scientists, teachers, doctors. But they find that those who they aspire are not doing it as well, because their salary is not improving. So this is not good. So they came out and started protesting. So in the 80s, you have students protesting because of inflation in China. Inflation from 86 to 87, the prices rising from 20% to 4%. A lot of the people being hard hit by it, their salary is not catching up. So they complain. Now, Deng Xiaoping actually surrounded himself with more moderates like Hu Yaobang, the General Secretary, and also the Premier Zhao Ziyang. So he did surround himself with moderates who agree with his open door policy. You have to remember, China's government is also a group of people competing with one another, or there are different directions, just like in the Cultural Revolution, the old guards and the red guards, okay? The old generals and against the red guards, okay? And even during Deng Xiaoping's time is this. Well, Deng Xiaoping being the kind of the leader, you know, the well-respected leader, he still needs to get people behind him to do things. And people behind him divide up into moderates and hardliners. Hardliners want something like back in the old days when we're in control, people just listen, you know, people worship Mao, you know, so things were easy, so we don't have to worry that much about things. But the moderates believe that China needs to develop, otherwise China will stay poor and then the regime will be in danger. So they want more opening, want more you can say liberty for people to do things. So they clash. So even though Deng Xiaoping was in charge, he had a moderate to in charge of the government as well, but the students still protest, and the hardliners felt that Hu Yaobang was letting the students do whatever they want, so he's not controlling them, he's not cracking down on the protests, so that's why the country is going into chaos, so he was forced to resign. And then when Hu Yaobang died, basically couple years more after he was forced down, he died in April 1989. And when he died, a lot of the people came out to commemorate him. It's kind of like the Tiananmen Square incident in 1976 when Zhou Enlai died. They went out to the Tiananmen Square. It's a huge square to commemorate. Now, at that time, they went out to commemorate not only Zhou Enlai, but also in protest of the Cultural Revolution and actually to Mao. But because Mao is such a, larger than life legacy, when he said stop, the people still stop. So they didn't continue. But this time, Deng Xiaoping didn't have that kind of he was regarded as a leader. Everyone regarded him as the office leader, but he did not have that personal cult or worship followers. So when they gather this time, they also, just like last time, there's not only gathering for Hu Yaobang, but gathering to complain about situation continue. So they were not happy with the policies, but they knew that Hu Yaobang was at least on their side, kind of wanting things to improve, but they didn't like what's going on in society. They didn't like the high prices, didn't like the lack of assurance about their future. So they went out, and this triggered a big protest that will be eventually joined by other people, teachers, students, other people, even military officers, and a lot of people wanting to a chance to voice their opinion about China should be more free. Now, so this is very clear, as I was mentioning, even people in Hong Kong, when talk about returning to China, even now, okay, one thing is to be supporting, China's rule and so on. The other thing is to say no to freedom. I still believe that most Hong Kong people will want more freedom. Back in 1989, it's like they're under communist control, Were they all about overthrowing the government? No, I don't think so. But they were actually there to ask for more freedom. They asked for more freedom. But when you have such a big crowd, when you start asking and the government is not responding as well, you become frustrated. And suddenly, as time went on, you start criticizing not only the situation, but also the leaders, including Deng Xiaoping. So it escalates. Now, as you will see later, China is not like they did not try to disperse the crowd. They tried different things, even though their patience is short, okay? They didn't try for a long time. They tried basically a couple months, okay? So before they cracked them down and had a crackdown. But they did try, as you see in the video. But it's also unavoidable that it's very embarrassing for the Chinese government, because the Chinese government had this long history of, manipulating the Chinese people, especially under Mao. So now suddenly all these people saying no, complaining, and worst thing is that this is all revealed to the world, because there are foreign journalists in China. So they were capturing this, they were sending the images home. So the whole world was watching. I remember there's people with a very positive view about the Tiananmen Square protest before the crackdown, saying that, finally people coming down, maybe China's to change, because there's so many people there, they're going to have enough pressure. But while it was pressure, but it's also a source of embarrassment for Chinese, because at that time, it was the first time it's a summit between the highest level of China and the Soviet Union. Basically, they didn't do it since one time when Mao met with Khrushchev, okay? But because of the Sino-Soviet split, they didn't meet again at the highest level of government. So this time, Gorbachev went to China to try to meet with Deng Xiaoping, and they're supposed to have this reception at Tiananmen Square. But because of all the protesters, they couldn't get there. So Gorbachev had to land
at the airport. It was an enormous embarrassment for China. Heads of state normally receive elaborate ceremonial welcomes in central Beijing. For President Gorbachev, there was this hastily arranged and barely adequate airport greeting. The Soviet leader and his wife Raisa were met by China's ceremonial president, Yang Changkern. Mr. Gorbachev said this was a time of renewal and hope, a possible watershed in relations between the communist giants. To show their goodwill, Moscow this week began withdrawing 3/4 of the 50,000 troops on China's Mongolian border. Economically, China is ahead of the Soviet Union. Better relations could see the Soviets bartering their raw materials for Chinese consumer goods. Mr. Gorbachev said there was keen interest in the transformation unfolding in China. That wasn't a reference to these students demanding Soviet-style political changes. However, it's doubtful Mr. Gorbachev would tolerate this kind of protest in Moscow's Red Square. The hunger strikers say they'll stay until the government talks to them publicly. Such talks would involve the government here admitting that the students are right, that modern China has serious problems which must be faced, that there have to be political reforms to match the economic progress. So far, the senior leadership has refused to meet the students, though the communist chief Zhao Ziyang peered down from the Great Hall of the People. A confrontation seems inevitable. Police have finally moved in, surrounding the hunger strikers in Tiananmen Square, where President Gorbachev is due to appear tomorrow.
So you can see the reported time, and the foreign press is also reporting about, seems like a clash is inevitable because they reached a part that they couldn't really compromise. It was the students still there, the student leaders, the protesters gathering together, and they couldn't go because their demands weren't accepted, even though China seems to be, doing things they never thought before to try to disperse them, including having a televised debate with Li Peng, with the students, even though Li Peng was kind of embarrassed and humiliated by the students leader in the time. But at least the government was trying, and kind of a compromise from a Chinese communist position regarding what the Communist Party would have done in the past, especially during Mao's time. So the government felt that we already, backing down, trying to disperse you. But the students are worried because students worry that if we go home, they may go to search us and seek us, okay? But now we have the force of the people, tens of thousands of people in Tiananmen Square, okay? And they wouldn't come in and arrest us all, right? It would not be, it would be impossible. So there's one group saying that we should end, before they they launched violence over us. And some felt that, if we leave now, they're going to seek us one by one, so we'll be with less protection. Might as well continue to stay here until they back down more. So the students, as a result, and the protesters or the supporters chose to stay and did not leave, including even after when the General Secretary Jiao Ziyan and another moderate came to try to disperse them with the future Premier Wen Jiabao is in here. When Zhao Ziyan came out, it's almost like one of the last straws because he felt that the moderates in the government no longer could hold the hardliners, because the hardliners say, okay, you back down, you gave way, and they're not doing anything. Okay, they're still around, so they're not listening to you. So what are you talking about? So they were complaining about this. They were saying that this moderation, this moderate approach is not working. We're going to send in armies. They're asking Deng Xiaoping, they're urging Deng Xiaoping to take action. And so when Zhao Ziyan came out, it's really the end, because he kind of knew that if the students don't leave, the hardliners will get their way. So, which they did. So he went out, they didn't listen, and he was quickly put in under house arrest, and lost his position. So next will be the armies coming in. Now, the best is to look at this in the clip, which I'm going to show you. I picked the one by Al Jazeera, so that because you pick either side, there will be people saying that this is pro-West, this is pro-China. So I picked somewhere in the middle. And hopefully by picking the middle, of course, you can see from the people interviewed, they're also more interviewing those who were engaged in protesting. But it's also true that China, officially, have make some statements, and they probably will not be available for interviews. But anyway, so I think this clip will give you some idea, at least what's going on, why it was Tiananmen Square protests, and why there was killings, and why there's a crackdown, and how it affected Hong Kong is what we want to talk about right after this clip.
After Mao's death, and having survived several purges himself, Communist Party leader Deng Xiaoping led China into a new era, opening the economy up to the West.
Deng Xiaoping, who had been under arrest, came out again and said, why don't we try capitalism? Socialism isn't really working, let's try capitalism. And so all of a sudden, China became a very exciting place. Suddenly people were wearing colors instead of just blue and gray Mao suits. They started wearing red, green, yellow, and there was this idea that maybe the West wasn't such a bad place after all.
But political reform was not moving at the same pace as economic reform.
There was a sense that China was coming out of a shell and moving forward. And then in '87, an anti-bourgeois liberalization campaign, and some famous intellectuals were purged, and the secretary of the party who was pushing these reforms was purged, and Hu Yaobang.
Hu Yaobang was forced to resign for his support of the student uprising of 1986. His efforts made him a hero for thousands of students demanding greater freedom.
Although we didn't necessarily agree with Hu Yaobang's ideas, we really sympathized with him. Lots of students thought that Hu Yaobang was at least a very enlightened leader.
Hu's death on April the 15th, 1989, 2 years after his public shaming, was the catalyst for a protest that would become the biggest modern China had witnessed.
We needed an excuse. And then when Hu Yaobang died, we thought similar, commemorating a former General Secretary of Communist Party is not something that outrageous. I mean, it's something people can do. Government wouldn't be able to just suppress that.
What started as a protest at Hu's treatment grew in momentum. Emboldened, the protesters wrote a list of demands. They poured onto Tiananmen Square.
As university students, we felt we had a social responsibility to fulfill, and we were passionate about our country. The demands made at the time were worthy and just, from dealing with corruption to speeding up the political reform, from media freedom to law and democracy. They were the kind of desires shared by all students in the 80s.
The demonstration started to take the form of an outdoor rock festival.
I think when the students went to the square, the people were amazed. A spontaneous demonstration hadn't happened before, so people were really surprised and a little nervous and a little curious, but also it was almost joyous because the students were waving flags and the weather was good.
I walked into Tiananmen Square in April 1989 by coincidence. It was purely for curiosity. You start listening to the students' public speeches, and they were intellectuals. They were so good speeches, and I was so much inspired.
As the protests continued, the students' demands grew. Soon they started asking for democracy.
I think the word democracy misled a lot of overseas viewers because they immediately thought, oh, well, they understand what majority rule is in elections. No, the students didn't understand that. To them, democracy just meant, get off our back.
We probably don't know what democracy is living in China, but we have a pretty good idea what totalitarian is, what is non-democracy is.
Unsure of how to quell this growing dissent, China's rulers tried publicly denouncing it. On April the 26th, they published a damning editorial in the People's Daily newspaper, calling the protests anti-party and anti-socialist.
Because the labels anti-party and anti-socialist are so divisive and so strong and so frightening, that when you get those labels put on you, you know that a line has been drawn in the sand. I mean, their parents may have been sent to labor camps for 20 years for that kind of label.
That editorial was a blow. People went, oh my God, this is the Communist Party pronouncing its verdict on what it's going to do. So people were really angry, really upset.
Rather than turning the population against the students, the editorial had the reverse effect. In support of the students, policemen, journalists, government workers, and even some members of the armed forces joined the peaceful protests.
On some days, there were 1 million people in Beijing on the streets, and the population then was only 10 million. And so I think everybody was on the streets. I almost couldn't find anyone who hadn't been part of a protest. And if you weren't actually marching, you were gawking.
The editorial also widened a rift within the Communist Party itself. On one side, the moderates, led by Secretary General Zhao Ziyang. On the other, hardliners, led by the Premier Li Peng. Both sought to influence the country's ultimate leader, Deng Xiaoping, on how to resolve the standoff with the protesters.
People like Zhao Ziyang were saying, okay, that editorial is out there, but it was a mistake. Revise that editorial, then we can talk with the students and we can solve this peacefully. Deng Xiaoping's face had been involved in that April 26th editorial because ostensibly it was his words and his decision. So for him to have to backtrack would be a loss of face for him personally, which he wasn't willing to do, especially with people like Li Peng and others pressing him not to do it.
On Tiananmen Square, the students began organizing themselves into unions.
My experience can prove that this movement is quite a spontaneous one, because I jumped in quite randomly, and in 1 week or 10 days, I came to the highest position. I became the president of the Independent Student Union of all universities in Peking.
With people all over China taking to the streets to openly call for change, the communist state looked fragile. Conservatives within the party now started to lobby for a forceful response. A confrontation seemed inevitable. As the Tiananmen Square protests of May 1989 grew, thousands of students and workers camped out on the square. Wild storms failed to discourage them. But some began to lose patience with the government's refusal to discuss their list of demands. On May the 13th, just 2 days before the first state visit to China by a Russian president in 30 years, 3,000 of the protesters went on a hunger strike.
Gorbachev was visiting China, so everyone thought it was a good opportunity. It could really force a dialogue between the government and the students and let the world know what was happening here, and that it wasn't simply a bunch of students causing trouble.
Hunger strike was not a student organization's decision, collective decision for sure. It was called by 6 of us. The Student Autonomous Union decided to support and help organize the hunger strike, but they made it clear this is not a collective decision. We are college students. This is a democracy movement. It will be only natural and right to have different voices.
In response to the hunger strike, Li Peng invited student leaders to the Great Hall for a televised meeting.
The first time we asked for Li Peng to come out was April 22nd. Almost a month later, he agreed to meet us.
A national audience watched student leader Wu Kaishi publicly berate his leader.
I was a representative. I wasn't just a student. I am there only because there are thousands of hunger strikers behind me, millions of Chinese people hoping for me to speak for them. I did the right thing, that I need to speak equally and affirmatively with the government.
The students' actions had inspired many. Workers formed the first independent workers' union in 40 years.
I heard the workers' organization was organized in the corner of Tiananmen Square, so I just went there and joined them. Later, we were running for the election, so I was elected as the spokesperson.
They organize themselves. Yeah, they are so brave, because the sentence for students, activists, are quite limited. 4 years for Wang Dan, for example. But for the workers, the highest is execution.
With the situation escalating, Secretary General Zhao Ziyang visited the protesters in the square. They ignored his plea to end their action. Zhao, who was accused of dividing the party, was fired and placed under house arrest. Martial law was declared, and on May the 20th, troops moved onto the streets of Beijing.
As government, instead of a response to the students' request for dialogue, you put out martial law. That was the worst decision they made. When the martial law declared, probably a few hours of fear, and then the next day, and the next day, and the next day, more people coming into streets.
People stopped them. People stood in front, and of course the army stopped, and people gave them popsicles and drinks, and talked to them, shook hands, and the soldiers really were quite confused. So the martial law, I called it marshmallow law, because nothing happened. And that was a big humiliation for the Communist Party.
After 3 days, the soldiers retreated to the outskirts of Beijing. The protest continued for another 11 days as Communist Party leaders planned their next move. Then, on June the 3rd, 1989, Deng Xiaoping gave the order to clear the square.
His orders to the troops were contradictory in one sense. You have to clear the square by 6 a.m., no matter what. On the other hand, please, no bloodshed. Well, for the soldier, of course, you can't do both of those.
Suddenly, the military was coming in from different parts of the city. All four corners of Beijing, they were marching in. And there were tanks and armored personnel carriers.
A lot of us arrived and found the army shooting those who were blocking their trucks' way, setting up pedestrian barriers. They were shooting at these people.
The tanks came roaring in, and people tried to stop them by putting a city bus perpendicular to block the road. And I saw the tanks just smash into the bus.
As rumors spread that the army was approaching the square, the students were getting desperate.
I realized that it's my responsibility to organize a vote. But it was all dark. The government have take off all the lights on the square. I said that, okay, now we shout. Yeah, those people who want to stay, shout stay. Those people want to leave, shout leave. So with these two voices, I compare. I think it's the same level of voice. And finally, I ordered the retreat.
Fearing for her safety, Jan Wang left Tiananmen Square and headed back to the Beijing hotel.
I got to the balcony just in time because the troops did arrive right after that. Saw them coming in and I saw shooting. And then I saw these ambulances start to come out of the square. I don't know why people were cowering. Why didn't they just leave? They didn't. They stayed there as if they wanted to protect the students.
We were moving from east to west, and the tear gas came from behind. One of them exploded among us, and everyone panicked.
People were coming out, and it was dark, so I couldn't tell if they were dead or just wounded. A lot of shooting, and it went on for hours.
The tank was moving fast, right along the curb from behind me. I turned around and the tank was so close that I could see the cannon above my head. I fell on the ground, then I felt the tank going over my body. I was still conscious. I felt I was being crushed by something heavy. I was dragged along for a while, and I would never forget how it felt. My head and my back was bumping against the hard cement ground. I remember that very well.
The break of dawn did not stop the onslaught.
All night I was sitting on the balcony watching this, almost like a ballet. And there weren't enough ambulances, so I saw pedicab drivers. I saw them racing into the square and coming out with bodies piled on their carts.
Overnight, the Chinese Red Cross issued a statement saying 2,600 people had been killed. That figure was rapidly retracted. The Chinese government claimed that 241 people were killed, including 23 soldiers. 7,000 people were injured.
I never thought they will send soldiers with guns shooting people with a real bullet. Most likely, I thought they will use wooden stick coming in and beating us up. That's what I was telling people. I said, let's get ready. So I never thought they were really shooting bullets into people's heads and people's chests.
The troops were back in charge of the capital, but a day later, it was obvious the spirit of defiance wasn't dead.
I was still in the Beijing hotel, and my husband was with me, and he said, you better get out here. So I ran out on the balcony, and I saw this guy, a young man in a white shirt, holding some bag, and I thought he's going to get squashed because they had run over people. There was a long line of tanks, as long as you could see down the main boulevard. And he's like a soccer goalie. He's like going to stop this tank. And to my surprise, the lead tank stopped. I see the man climb up onto the tank. And I go, are you crazy? Are you nuts? And he seems like he wants to talk to the people inside. After a moment, he gets down again. And then you see the tank actually twist to one side to go around this nutty guy. And the man jumps in front of him. And then the tank goes the other way, and the man jumps in front, and then the tank stops. And suddenly, two guys from the sidelines drag him to safety. And he's become the symbol, but he's a mystery. We don't know who he is.
In the days and weeks that followed, the Chinese government cracked down on the survivors. They arrested hundreds, accusing them of being counter-revolutionary or for disrupting the social order.
Do I regret that I didn't get arrested? Do I regret I didn't get killed? I guess, yeah, from time to time. That's called survivor's guilt. If I have known the end is such an unavoidable bloodshed, would I still go for it? I don't know. I really don't know.
Okay, that gives I think that's a good summary of what happened then. Yes, many of the interviewed were those involved in the protesting, but they're also including some foreign generals, including that lady from Canada, I think from Globe and Mail, she's from, and other scholars. I think the situation was pretty similar to what is depicted in this video, and despite all the spinning Chinese government later day, questioning about no one died within the square and other things, the response was quick and everyone saw what's going on. And I think this is one of the most devastating imageries of China in modern days. It's kind of, allow me to say, it's kind of unfortunate for Deng Xiaoping, because Deng Xiaoping was indeed one of those more moderate ones, and more, you can say he's not going to give up communist rules, true, but he's more concerned about China, improving, coming up from this poverty and this problem of Cultural Revolution. And Deng Xiaoping, unfortunately, related to this incident that he was the leader, he ordered this crackdown and this bloodshed. This, in the measurement of death, is nothing compared to the Great Famine or Cultural Revolution, but it was also an incident that's captured on camera. And when all these foreign journalists were on the ground. So it was widely witnessed by people, and it had a big impact on the world and also on the imagery of China, because when they did that. And it was also very immediate seeing that even those who usually, pro-China knew what's going on. For example, even Wen Huibao in Hong Kong, one of the major leftist newspaper saying that, they were really distressed, really sad about what happened. And the Xinhua News Agency, you remember, this is the, you can say, an official embassy of China in Hong Kong, because China would not have an embassy on the land that they claim to be their own. So they used the Xinhua News Agency. So it was the de facto government of China in Hong Kong. The chief, Xu Jiatuan, resigned actually and defected to the States right after what happened in Tiananmen Square. So, and you also have professors, for example, Ding Zilin, in China. Her son joined protests and was killed. She found the Tiananmen mothers been meeting for many years in asking the government to look at the case and give the families, and because they have been, the government saying that it's kind of like a cracking down of some people trying to overthrow the government, so the government could not do anything but to send in troops. So the mothers, they were angry, of what happened to their loved ones, but also angry that they bore the name of, trying to overthrow the government. They're just saying they're just young people trying to protest, asking the government to change so that they get more freedom and some changes in society. So you can see from different incidents that this people knew what happened there, unlike some of the later spinning trying to depict the whole incident very differently, creating some kind of conspiracy theories regarding it. Now, Hong Kong reaction was swift. Even during the time of the Tiananmen Square protests, Hong Kong people would come out in forces to support them, and a lot of the time they would come in hundreds of thousands at the Victoria Park. And Victoria Park start resuming that same old. Remember in the early 70s when they protest for the W Island, they used Victoria Park, and at that time it was more like a leftist old and new to protest against Japan while getting the colonial government quite nervous. But now at this time it's more like the Hong Kong people coming to Victoria Park to protest against mainland China or protest the lack of freedom from mainland China. Pro-democratic activities in Hong Kong began mostly at that point. Before that they also had it, but there are different stages. In the past, pro-democratic activities sometimes is blended with leftism. For example, the young left, you remember, the new left, they were more about social reform and so on. So you can also say they're pro-democratic. But the June 4th, the Tiananmen Square gave birth to a new, you can say, movement of pro-democratic activities. Now, this is the older type, okay? This is the type that come up in Hong Kong to demand for democracy. But this group is not only demand democracy for Hong Kong, but also for China. So it's mainly for the whole general cultural Chinese democracy for them, because they said that the reason why crackdown happens is because there's no democracy in China. And they also felt that if there's democracy in China, Hong Kong would be even better, because Hong Kong, even after return to China, will also enjoy democracy. So protesting or demanding democracy in China is going to in turn help Hong Kong as well. So that's why this will be the early group of pro-democratic activities in Hong Kong. Later on, there will be more, for example, electoral reform debates, arguments, and then other pro-democratic activists involved. But later, more and more, there will be younger generation, and they're more about concerned about Hong Kong than on China. But that early days, after the Tiananmen Square, a lot of them is about China. So even the name if of it, if you look at the English name, it's called Alliance and Support of the Patriotic Democratic Movement in China. So basically, it has a strong feeling for China, for cultural Chinese democracy, for not just the mainlanders, but also for Chinese, because it's also want to imply for the Chinese in Hong Kong as well. The British, in response, issue a Hong Kong Bill of Rights. They decided to issue Hong Kong a British passport to 50,000 qualified households. Tell them that we are letting you come. The numbers was, I think at the time, questioned to be too small, because Hong Kong people were concerned about what happened if we have some kind of demonstrations and the tanks would come. So Tiananmen Square showed that what China was capable of doing. In the beginning, maybe they're not able to do that. They won't do it again, just like the Chinese students were thinking, but shows them to be wrong if they ever try to cross the line. If China's government felt that you try to push them out of power, they could do anything, and they would do anything. So they were afraid, and when the British say only 50,000 passports, households, passport to 50,000 households, a lot of people were complaining how little there was. Now, but the Tiananmen Square also gave British a more way to demand for the electoral reform. Now, China and the Basic Law Committee, they have always been taking a hard line to most of British proposals to electoral reform. So as you saw earlier, so they didn't change a lot over the years. But in 1991, they kind of gave in because it's barely 2 years after Tiananmen Square, and there's still a lot of sentiment of concern and scare among the Hong Kong people. So the Chinese government felt that if we say no again, it's just going to give them more concern. It's going to affect how the Hong Kong taking over Hong Kong in the long run. So they gave in. They allow Hong Kong government to start this so-called the regional representation. The regional is called the geographical constituency. So unlike the functional constituencies, who make up of professionals in a certain areas, but mostly it's because it's a small group election. But the geographic constituency was a real election, meaning that they divided Hong Kong into 18 regions or geographical regions. Every one region can elect one representative member to go to the Legislative Council. So 18 of them would go to the Legislative Council, and those 18 would be directly elected. So Hong Kong people have a vote to vote for them. Parties would run for that position, and they will be able to vote for them. Now, that is an improvement. But there's also just making, you can say 18 seems a lot, but the Chinese government only agreed to move 12 of the original indirectly elected members to the 18th. So yes, adding 18 directly elected, but it's also removing 12 indirectly elected. So the thinking is that maybe the 12 indirectly elected will be, anti-communist already. So I'm just adding 8 more. And so they also took they also took some away from and strengthened the so-called functional constituency. But the functional constituency, they were not too worried about, because the functional constituency, as mentioned, because they involve small groups of individuals and individual professionals. So they believe that they could still control that quite well. So, but at least it's a change now. Now it becomes about a third of the Legislative Council now could be directly elected. So 18 out of 60 of them could be directly elected. But it's still not very, the British government was not very happy, because it seems like China, after this blunder of killing us people, when the whole world was watching, even after that, we can only get 18. And then at that time, it's also the new Prime Minister, John Major, came out. John Major had a friend called Chris Patten, who lost his seat I think it's in Bath, his constituency at Bath. But he's a very capable politician. So when he looked at Hong Kong, looking at only 5 years remaining for them to try to achieve this idea of having at least or maybe close to half of those in the Legislative Council to be directly elected. They're no way closing to it. So it's only now 18 out of 60. Now it's better, but this is right after Tiananmen Square and only 18, you know. So and 12 of them they lost to the so no more the indirectly elected 12. They lost to make up this 18. So it's not a lot of improvement. It's basically just 6 more elected officials. So they felt that maybe David Wilson was not the person to do it because after all, he was a diplomat. And they were used to, you know, if not kowtowing, at least very friendly to the Chinese government. So having David Wilson to do it may not be the best idea. So what happened is that they decided to change. They decided to make Chris Patten the governor. Now, Chris Patten was a governor, but and is a politician. And when a politician replacing a diplomat, someone from the Foreign Office, it's very different. Because the Foreign Office would see Hong Kong as one of the major assignments. And they would try to continue this because in the civil servant system in Britain is there permanent. So they stay there for a long time. Now, sometimes you have members of parliament for longer, maybe a couple terms or 3 terms, but very rarely they stay there for 20-something years, okay? So basically you don't. And when you go as a parliamentarian, the focus is different because if you work as a diplomat, you are responsible not only for your country, but also you have to be careful about what the legacy you built within the department. Just take David Tran example. David Tran, even though he was not the hardest liner during the Hong Kong riots, but because he was implicated in, fighting, going the hard line against the leftists, he was removed, basically was forced to step down as the governor in Hong Kong after, even though the riots were kind of put down and replaced by Mackley Host. So because people remember your portfolio, remember what you did. So for diplomats, they have to be careful. They don't want to upset China so much that in the future, the foreign department feel that you're not suitable. Because the foreign office, in the future, for example, if you stay on and continue to do other jobs, they may say, okay, because you have such a bad relationship with China, I shouldn't promote you or I shouldn't put you over there. So they didn't want, and the feeling is that many of these officials were too concerned about China's feelings, okay? But Chris Patten was different because Chris Patten was a politician. Politician did not care about or did not have to care too much about what the department feels. The politicians care about what the voters would feel. If the voters felt that the British government did nothing to help Hong Kong's electoral reform or did nothing to speed up Hong Kong's becoming a democracy before returning to China, they are going to vote him out next time. But if he, during this last term as a governor in Hong Kong, did to the pleasing of the voters, he might be able to return home and run for governor, run for parliament again and got his seat back, which exactly what he did. So Chris Patten came, and the first day you saw a difference. For even the sinologists like you and David Wilson, they came with the colonial tradition of the feather hats, okay? Wearing the feathers on their hats, just like Mackley Host. But Chris Patten is the first one wearing a suit there, and he took a very populist approach and image. He'll go to the community, he'll go to eat egg tarts. He loved egg tarts, he loved food, he loved eating, he loved meeting people because he's a politician. So it's a very different imagery than the diplomats, okay? Even for someone as friendly as Mackley Host or you, okay, David Wilson is a bit more remote. but Yurt and McLeod were quite friendly and always would go down and visit people, but they were more as like inspection. But Chris Pennon is more like vote getting, just like what he would have done back in England, meeting with constituencies, okay, meeting with voters. So when Chris Pennon came, he was single-minded. He wanted to complete this electoral or at least constitutional reform and to increase the number of seats to be available through direct voting. So he came in there 1992 and he directly immediately said that we're going to change the system. First of all, he said, I'm going to lower the voting age from 21 to 18. So suddenly, Hong Kong at that time maybe have about 6 million people or maybe a little less. 3.7 million people in Hong Kong could vote. So this, by lowering the voting age, a lot more people can vote. He also started adding, making differences to the constituency. He said, I'm going to remove everyone that's from the government or appointed members. If you later, I'll show you the chart. Okay, in 1991, there's still 4 from the government and 18 appointed members. He said, I'm going to remove them all. I'm going to put them over to the functional constituencies. Okay, and I'm going to add some members by the Electoral College as well. Okay, and then I'm going to increase the directly elected China. In regionally say, okay, there are 18 of them, you can increase to 20 the most. No more before the turnover of Hong Kong. Chris Pennon said, I'm going to increase it as promised to 20, but then I'm going to change the system. The biggest change to explain clearly is that he wants to expand the functional constituency. Now, the functional constituency was not a concern in the beginning. If he say, I'm just going to move those directly elected to functional constituency, China's government would not be upset. But he say, after I expand the functional constituency, I'm going to allow Hong Kong people, some of them anyway, to vote because he wants to expand the relevance of it. For example, in the past, okay, if you are medical constituency, maybe I can allow 100 doctors and and 50 specialists to vote for this position. Now, when you say, okay, I'm going to expand to the medical, I'm going to expand to a lot of, for example, all these medical staff, medical people, all these people can vote. Suddenly became a almost popular vote. They expand the eligible, almost everyone is touched by the medical industry can vote. So suddenly, a lot more people can vote, and he added 2.7 million votes, which is a lot. Meaning that a lot of Hong Kong people now have 2 votes now. Meaning that, for example, I have a vote for the geographical. I mean, live in Hong Kong, in the southern part of Hong Kong Island. I have the geographical vote for my candidates running in the southern part of Hong Kong Island, so I can vote for that one. But I'm also work as a teacher, for example. So I also have a vote for the Hong Kong education, the functional constituency of education. They have 5 candidates, so I have a vote to choose which one I want. So I suddenly have 2 votes. Now that was even though it's not creating a totally direct electoral process, but now most of the 60 seats of the Legislative Council could be elected and by almost a direct process. So you look at this, the major difference is to increase this number here, but make it a sort of like a directly elected. So not a universal one. Okay, when I said direct elected means that the voters have a say about who to vote. It's not universal, meaning that it's not that everyone can vote. But even now, if you look at a Canadian voting system, it's not universal for every member, right? Everyone can vote, but we can only vote for the person that running at my constituency. For example, if I'm from Richmond, I can only vote for the guy running for the Richmond seats, okay? Where there's many of the parliament or the member of legislative council. So it's still not, I can't vote for every single one. It's the same in Hong Kong, but still that vote is a direct vote. So I can vote for this medical staff plus my geographical constituency. So suddenly that means that 50 out of 60 of the total number of seats could be elected by Hong Kong people. Now, that was a big change. And so that is exactly what the British would want to do back in 1884, okay, with some hopes at achieving that. But with the diplomats there, they did not want to push it. Chris Patten didn't care. Okay, he's going to push it because he's only responsible for the voters. He's not responsible. He doesn't have to stay in the Foreign Office in the future. So I believe that this is the only way we can achieve that original goal. Now, Beijing was suspicious of Chris Patten for a long time. When they suggest this change for 1995, they were furious. And they would use very big names for him. They call him the 1,000 years sinners. Okay, they say that they shouldn't be rocking the boats. Okay, they criticize him. They say that he was the one who really destroyed the relationship between Britain and Hong Kong. And now the Foreign Office were concerned as well. So the Foreign Office was not on the same step as Chris Patten either, because they're afraid that it's going to hurt British and Hong Kong foreign diplomacy, for a long time to come. But Chris Patten, true to being a politician, he pushed ahead. And China was especially concerned because some of his friends, including Martin Lee, who is the now he has formed a United Democrats of Hong Kong. So basically a coalition of activists who advocate for democracy. So he formed this coalition, and in the last election in 1991, he already won 16 out of 18 the geographical constituency seats. So there's a concern that Chris Patten not only making the system more directly elected, but some of his friends may dominate, which turns out to be true at the end. The United Democrats of Hong Kong, that coalition will win 29 out of 60 seats in 1995. So yes, it's not the absolute majority, but it's a lot more than the second group. The second group, I think, only got about 12 or something. So the biggest party in Hong Kong, and so China's fear was realized. Now, when Chris Patten did that, and he was criticized by China, but as said, also criticized by some of his own members of the government, especially from the Foreign Office, because he neglected the long followed don't rock the boat tradition of Anglo-Chinese dealings and really angered Beijing. And so that reform package angered China and create some kind of gaps between him and his staff, and eventually led to the collapse of talks between Britain and Hong Kong in 1993. So basically, for the last few years, it's more like, I'm going to do this, okay, and then China say, do whatever you want, I'm not going to accept it. So this is exactly what they say. At that time, in the end, Chris Patten trying to say that let's have this parliament, this legislative council that voted in 1995 to continue to function until the next election, which will be, say, 2000. And China say, no way, no through train. In Hong Kong, candidates saying no through train. You can't ride a train from 1995 all the way to 2000. Everyone's going to get off the train. So that's what it's saying. So 1997, I'm going to abolish this. I'm going to have a new election. So if you don't listen to us, I'm not going to. So that's the reason for you can say from the Foreign Office or the colonial government, those working, with the Foreign Office to be unhappy about Chris Patten. because Chris Patten came, yes, very popular with the crowd, popular from the voters in Britain, popular, helpful for his own future when he returned home. But it's really bad for those who had to stay behind to work with China, because the talks broke down. This became the shouting match, becomes all this long-term working of gaining trust of Chinese officials now being broken, disrupted by Chris Patten, and it would take years for the British government or foreign office to regain trust of the Chinese. But that's how it happened. And at the end, 1997, Hong Kong was returned. Chris Patten left. You can say he's achieved his purpose, at least from the Prime Minister's point of view. He wanted him to show to the world that the British were true to establishing democracy from Hong Kong, but his method is questioned by many. And you can say that, yes, a lot of people, was happy about what he did, and also he was a popular governor. But in hindsight, because it really didn't do anything, because the whole legislative council was abolished and another election. So basically, they switched back to the old system right after he left. So, but it was a very interesting episode of Hong Kong before its return to China. And Chris Patten also famously has 3 very beautiful daughters, and the darlings of the Hong Kong people. At that time, at the end, when they're bidding farewell, the girls be crying. So it leaves a kind of sad legacy of the British colonial rule in Hong Kong. Now, if you talk to Hong Kong people, this is strange, because in Canada, we always, especially now, talk about anti-colonialism. Usually colonialism is associated with lots of bad things, okay, which is true. But when you talk to people in Hong Kong, and people also question, some in mainland, so how come Hong Kong people like the colonizing British Empire, okay? But the legacy of the British will come mixed, especially because Hong Kong was kind of a later colony, and a lot of the development of Hong Kong that people remember, starting with the 70s with Maggie Ho's and reform, ICAC, and the Chris Patten's way of populist way, So a lot of people, especially when you compare to mainland China, for example, compared to Tiananmen Square, some Hong Kongers prefer, they may not prefer to be continue to be colony, but they prefer the lifestyle. They have a nice nostalgic memory of Hong Kong in the 80s and in the 90s, when Hong Kong culture was strong, Cantonese was strong, when the economy was good, and they didn't have to worry about, a lot of the, under the rule of a communist government. So I can say the feelings are mixed. So don't be surprised if you talk to Hong Kongers that they did not see the British as bad, okay? Their sentiment may be very different from other people from other countries, including, for example, here in Canada or in mainland China, why you feel so good about the colonizing British Empire, okay? But there's a reason for it, because of the development and also the comparison. And some people remember the 67 riots and say, wow, luckily the British were there. Otherwise, Hong Kong would be turned into chaos, So a lot of this feeling, but part of studying history is to know all this, and then, understanding why things develop a certain way. Now, next time, we're going to talk about Hong Kong after its return, and we're going to introduce this idea of a honeymoon, where in the beginning, things seems to be going okay, acceptable in Hong Kong, and even well in the part. And I'll argue, I see that honeymoon goes all the way to 2008. Some people say it ends in 2003, but we'll see. We'll talk more about Hong Kong history after the return to China in 1997 next time.